The moment the front door slammed, Maya felt the shift in the house, the sudden tension that filled the quiet rooms like a storm rolling in. She had only stepped away for a minute, long enough to grab a towel from the bathroom, when the toddler started crying and the neighbors appeared outside, pointing toward the window as if they had caught her doing something terrible. By the time the parents rushed home, faces rigid with suspicion, the accusations were already forming in their eyes, accusations Maya felt but couldn't yet understand. And before she could speak, before she could say anything at all, the father's voice cut through the room with a sharpness that made her pulse quicken. "What did you do to our daughter?" The question hit her like a blow, fair, unearned, and shocking in its intensity. It was the beginning of a chain of judgments that would test her patience, her integrity, and her belief in people. And right at that moment, before she could defend herself, before the truth had a chance to breathe, she took a slow breath and tried to steady her voice, knowing that even the smallest tremble could be used against her. "By the way, since this story may remind some of you how quickly people jump to conclusions, let me ask you something. Who are you, and where are you watching from?" I love seeing viewers from different cities and countries. It reminds me how many lives and experiences meet right here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do it now, and leave a like so this story reaches more people who might relate to it. Now, let's go back to Maya, standing in the center of a living room where trust was breaking apart faster than she could gather her thoughts. She had been the Johnsons' babysitter for months, long enough to know their routines, their habits, and their trust, or at least what she believed was trust. The little girl adored her, always reaching out for her, always giggling at her silly impressions and playful songs. Everything had been normal today until the crying, until the noise outside, until the neighbors' frantic banging on the door as if they had uncovered a crime. Maya tried explaining that the child had simply fallen while trying to climb onto the couch, something she'd done 100 times before, something every toddler does. But explanation seemed almost useless against the rapid-fire questions that followed. Why wasn't Maya in the room? Why did the child cry so loudly? Why didn't they hear her comforting the girl from outside? Why did the neighbors insist they saw something concerning? Maya kept answering, her voice steady, her words clear, but each response seemed to feed a new doubt rather than calm an existing one. It was as if they were searching for reasons not to trust her rather than evidence of her innocence. The mother's eyes kept drifting to the toddler's knee, where a small red mark was forming. Just a bump, the kind that would fade by evening, but in that room it might as well have been a warning flare. Maya felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken accusation that hung thick between them. She stood tall, but inside, she felt the sting not just of being blamed, but of being assumed guilty before being heard. The neighbors added fuel without hesitation. They insisted they had seen the child pressed against the window, crying with fear. They insisted Maya had taken too long to respond. They insisted something felt off. None of them had been inside the home. None had seen the child slip. None had witnessed anything except a moment taken out of context. But their certainty was louder than Maya's calm explanations. And beneath their concern lay something else, something they didn't say aloud, but Maya could feel like a shadow behind every pointed remark. It wasn't the first time she'd seen it, and it wouldn't be the last. The quiet assumption that a young black woman caring for someone else's child must automatically be suspicious, that she must prove her innocence in situations where others would be given the benefit of the doubt. The parents tried to appear measured, but fear pushed their words forward faster than logic could keep up. They questioned her routines, her behavior, her judgment, even small details that had never mattered before. And while Maya answered with the same honesty she'd always brought into this home, she began to sense that honesty alone might not be enough. Trust had been shaken, and in its place grew a kind of scrutiny that followed her every move, every breath. She glanced at the little girl, who was now calm in her mother's arms, looking at Maya with the quiet innocence only a child possesses. There was no fear in her eyes, no sign of distress, only recognition and comfort. It should have been proof enough, but in that moment, emotion overpowered reason. Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she realized that this wasn't just about a small fall. It was about perception, about assumptions, about how quickly a situation could spiral when fear and doubt took the lead. And despite all her efforts to explain, she could feel Act 1 of the story closing in not with resolution, but with the heavy sense that something much larger was beginning to unfold, something she would have to face whether she was ready or not. When the police arrived, Maya could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she knew how quickly a small lie could grow into something dangerous when the wrong people believed it. The officers stepped into the Johnsons' home, listening first to the frantic claims of the neighbors, and Maya could tell from the looks exchanged between them that doubt was already spreading. She tried to speak calmly, explaining that she was there because she had been hired, that she had watched the kids many times before, that there must have been some misunderstanding, but her words felt like they were slipping through cracks in the floor. The children were upstairs, still unaware of the chaos unfolding beneath them, and the Johnsons were still not home, unreachable at the worst possible moment. The officers began asking questions, each one colder than the last, and Maya found herself repeating the same details, trying to keep her voice steady, while Mrs. Halper hovered nearby, arms crossed, adding little comments meant to plant suspicion. It became clearer by the minute that the officers weren't just verifying, they were looking for contradictions, anything they could use to justify treating her as a threat instead of a young woman trying to do her job. Maya kept thinking that if the Johnsons would just pick up their phone, everything would be resolved in seconds. But each call went unanswered, and every unanswered ring only seemed to make the officers more rigid. When they asked to look around the house, Maya hesitated for a moment, not because she wanted to hide anything, but because she knew it would be twisted as resistance. So she agreed, hoping that this would finally convince them. As they walked from room to room, Maya felt exposed in a way she had never felt before, like the very air around her was being judged. They opened drawers, peeked into closets, stepped into the kids' rooms, and Maya followed behind them, her hands shaking slightly at her sides. The little details that made the Johnsons' home warm and familiar suddenly felt unfamiliar and cold under scrutiny. After a long silence, one of the officers asked her why she seemed nervous. Maya wanted to say, "Because you were treating me like a criminal in a house I've worked in for months," but she swallowed it, knowing the truth wouldn't help. She simply said that anyone would be nervous if they were accused of something they didn't do. But the officer only wrote something in his notebook without looking at her. As tension built, the neighbors stood outside watching, whispering to each other, as if the scene confirmed all the prejudices they had carried long before this day. Someone filmed from across the yard, believing they had caught a moment of justice rather than a moment of injustice. Maya's phone buzzed again, another unanswered call to the Johnsons. She felt her hope thinning. Then, as the officers prepared to question her again, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway cut through the heavy atmosphere. The Johnsons had finally arrived. Maya felt a rush of relief and fear at the same time, because everything now depended on whether they would defend her without hesitation or crumble under the pressure of an angry audience. She listened as they stepped inside, confused and startled by the sight of police officers in their living room. The next moments were a blur of voices, questions, accusations, explanations overlapping. Mrs. Johnson's face went pale as she pieced together what had happened in their absence, and Mr. Johnson tried to regain control of the situation, asking the officers why they had come and why Maya was being treated this way. But the neighbors, emboldened by the spectacle, stepped in again, insisting that they had caught Maya doing something suspicious. Their confidence grew as if their version of events was the only truth worth hearing. Maya could see the officers shifting, caught between competing narratives, and she watched the Johnsons' expressions tighten as they realized the burden of proof had somehow fallen on Maya rather than on the people who had started this trouble. The room filled with the thick sense of injustice, but the officers continued their slow, methodical questioning, now directed at the Johnsons. Maya stood there silently, her future hanging in the balance as doubt, fear, frustration, and exhaustion pressed against her all at once, and all she could do was wait for anyone to finally say the words that would end this nightmare. As the officers stepped aside and the Johnsons finally reached Maya, the tense silence in the neighborhood seemed to stretch into something almost suffocating. Mrs. Johnson went straight to her son, pulling him into her arms as if shielding him from the weight of everything that had happened, and Mr. Johnson looked at Maya with a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and the painful realization of what she had just endured alone. For a moment, none of them spoke, as though words might somehow make the moment heavier. When Maya finally exhaled, it felt like letting go of hours of fear she had been forced to hold inside. She explained everything: how the child had slipped in the backyard, how she had lifted him, how she had been the only one trying to protect him while the neighbors assumed the worst. The Johnsons listened closely, horrified that their own neighbors had treated the woman they trusted like a threat for nothing more than being present with their child. Mrs. Johnson apologized again and again, her voice trembling, not out of formality, but out of genuine remorse. Mr. Johnson placed a steady hand on Maya's shoulder and told her she had done everything right, that none of this should ever have happened, and that they would make things right. But Maya wasn't entirely sure what making things right even meant anymore. She had always believed that doing her job well, staying calm, staying respectful, being patient, being careful, she had thought all of that protected her. Yet tonight proved that even her best was not enough to shield her from suspicion. As more neighbors stepped out from behind fences and porches, some embarrassed, some defensive, Maya felt the weight of their stares shift into something else: recognition, guilt, and maybe even shame. One woman admitted softly that she had assumed the worst because she didn't know Maya well. Another tried to justify her reaction by saying she was just being cautious, though her voice faltered, revealing the deeper truth behind her discomfort. The officers, now clearly understanding the situation, offered their own apologies, but even those felt complicated. They weren't unkind, but they had still believed the accusation without question. They had still stood between Maya and the child she had been hired to care for. They had still made her prove her innocence, while others simply had to point a finger. Maya appreciated their courtesy, but she couldn't pretend the fear wasn't real. She had felt the threat long before they realized there was none. When the officers left, and the neighborhood finally began to quiet, Maya found herself standing in the center of a place she had walked through dozens of times, yet that now felt unfamiliar. The Johnsons invited her inside to sit down, insisting she shouldn't drive home shaken, insisting they wanted to talk, to understand, to help her feel safe again. At first, she resisted, wanting nothing more than to leave the night behind, but something in their sincerity softened her, and she followed them inside, where the atmosphere was warm, calm, and completely different from the chaos outside. They made tea, they sat together, and slowly, without pressure, Maya let herself talk not just about what happened, but about how often things like this hovered over her life like a shadow. She couldn't shake. The Johnsons listened without interrupting, absorbing every word, as if only now realizing how fragile trust can be when the world sees someone through a distorted lens. They offered to speak to the neighbors, to clear her name publicly, to ensure she never had to go through this again. They offered to help her file a complaint if she wanted to. They offered their support in every direction they could think of. But what Maya appreciated most was simply being heard. Not dismissed, not doubted, heard. When she finally stepped back outside to head home, the neighborhood felt different again, not because the people had changed overnight, but because Maya had found her own clarity. She knew the night had shaken her, but it hadn't broken her. She had protected that child, done her job, and held onto her integrity even when fear pressed hard against her. And the truth was, people needed to change, not her. As she got into her car, she looked back at the quiet rows of houses, knowing the story of this night would linger far longer than the confrontation itself. Maybe, she thought, some of them would rethink the assumptions they made so quickly. Maybe the Johnsons' voices would carry further than hers alone. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone saw a woman like her doing her job, they would see competence instead of threat, care instead of suspicion. In that thought, she found a small but steady sense of closure, not the kind that erases what happened, but the kind that gives you the strength to move forward with your head held high. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. If it resonated with you or made you think, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It truly helps support more stories like this.